92, wasn't it? First contacted you?
Yes, as old married couples say, we've been together nearly a quarter of a century. No, we got together in 1992 because I, having written lots of, having general journalist, commenting on the scene in a fairly sort of caustic fashion, but started to focus in 1992 through my column in the Sunday Telegraph on the fact that we were suddenly being submerged. Businesses, little businesses, submerged, fishermen, farmers, everybody. Deluge of regulations, a lot of which, of course, were coming from Brussels. And I started to write about that in a half-informed way. And the best thing that happened to me was when you got in touch with me. And actually, you were applauding what I'd written.
Yes.
But I could soon tell, as a fully trained expert on food hygiene and lots of other things, that you were absolutely brilliant researcher.
Well, you were the only journalist that was really writing or attempting to understand what was going on. And I could see that you were actually looking beyond the sort of trivial, lightweight, let's have a laugh about silly regulations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's what I've always tried to do. But of all the things I've ever tried to got involved in, probably the biggest, well, certainly in terms of politics and the way our country is run and all that, has been what you and I joined forces to do around that time. Because we were writing a lot. I mean, you were incredibly expert on the way regulations work, the way government works, and so on. And we put our talents together.
But what was happening though is we didn't even know the half of it. We didn't really understand.
We went on a very, very long learning curve, which hasn't by any means stopped. Although we are now, unfortunately, 24 years later, facing this decision.
But it was partly Brussels, and then we got involved with, if you remember, with deregulation, going tramping the boards in Whitehall, seeing ministers, Hamilton, if you remember, Minister of Deregulation. Freeman, and they were all doing their best to try and sort out this regulatory overload. Well, no, they weren't. They were pretending to.
What they were discovering, Richard, what they were discovering, as we know, is that wherever they tried to do something, they could see that a lot of what the sort of things that you and I were writing about was absolutely nonsensical. It wasn't serving any purpose. This is a ridiculous regulation. I must do something about it. They then discovered, oh no, Minister, you can't do that. It comes from Brussels. Or just the officials themselves. But a lot of it was coming from Brussels. And that's where we started to realise that Britain was going through an absolutely extraordinary revolution in the way it was governed. And we cottoned onto that very quickly.
You remember SIs that we discovered, the great...
the diktats just handed out by the bureaucratic machine.
Which had nothing to do with
Brussels,
Parliament.
London, Whitehall, down to the town halls. That's the way a country was being run. Parliament had been completely sidetracked. And when we talked to politicians, we found that they
had no idea.
They had no idea. If they were in the front line as a minister or something, they found they could do nothing about it. But even they didn't really understand why they couldn't do anything about it. They were just being told, oh no, Minister, you can't do that.
And still pretending that they were in charge. And launching initiatives.
And here we are, Richard, having written 4 books about all these things.
They still don't know.
Here we are 24 years later, and nothing has changed in that respect. And that's why this referendum, which should be the most important thing that's happening in our lifetime politically, is so dismally low grade, because we are seeing every night, every day, we are reading and seeing politicians banging on about something they really don't know anything about.
Yeah, I mean, what we didn't realise at the time, and there was no reason why we should realise it, is that about then, just so you got this tide of regulation coming from Brussels, there was another movement happening in terms of globalisation. And that's only just beginning to become apparent, is that as Brussels was building up its acquis, as it like to call it, its big bundle of laws, the WTO was working on creating an international system with other global organisations creeping in around the edges. Dozens.
Yeah, far more than any politician has ever heard of.
Yeah. And now we've sort of got these multiple layers of regulation. And the system's now got so complicated that actually there's not a single man or woman anywhere that actually fully understands it.
Yeah, but the point you keep on making, Richard, with a huge amount of knowledge, far more than, as I say, any politician, is that we think that we have given away our right to govern ourselves in Britain to Brussels.
Yes.
But now you are seeing,
Yes.
other people within the system are probably seeing a bit of it, but you're trying to get an overview of just how far the stuff that we used to think, oh, that comes from above, it comes from Brussels. Sorry, above Brussels, there are all these, you mentioned the World Trade Organization, OECD, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, all those. So this great alphabet soup of a lot of them based in Geneva, but these are the bodies which are actually making the rules for the world. Now, there's nothing wrong with making rules for the world. As I keep on saying to you, when I go see my family in Delhi, I like to go, sometimes need to buy a battery. And I go to the market and I get a AAA. Why do I get the same battery in Delhi that makes my machines work as you would in Brazil or anywhere else? Because of a global regulation standard. Yeah. And so up to a point, as we move into a global world, we all need our standards. But it is such a revolution in the way that we are governed and the way that where rules come from. And what it's doing is showing how the EU is, instead of being the great up there, is actually just a little regional branch. Well, it's not a branch office, it's a kind of sorting office for stuff that's coming from everybody else.
Yeah, and when we look at this referendum, we're actually deciding who governs us. And to some extent, if you remember the old question with Heath, who rules Britain? Is it me or? And the answer was,
who governs Britain?
Yeah, not me.
When it turned out, trade unions back in 1973, but we said no, it's Brussels because we just joined.
Now we're saying Brussels is the middleman. That the real globalization means that all these institutions are running us. Brussels is now the barrier.
Yeah, but the other point which you make is, as we see this process really gathering way in all directions, we're always accused of if we left the EU, we'd be excluded from the top tables. The top tables aren't in Brussels anymore. No. A lot of them. They are higher up. And the countries which, like Norway and others, which have not joined the EU, have got far more presence, influence and clout there than we have, because we go there. Well, we don't go there. We do go to some, but other ones, we thought, oh, no, Britain can't go there in its own right. We have an EU common position. Yeah. And we've got one official with a lot more around him who go there representing 28 countries, shortly to be 30, 32, 33, God knows how many more they'll suck in. Perhaps Mr. Putin could take over the EU. That would solve a lot of problems. Yeah.
Okay, we'll go. Yeah, okay, I can imagine that. That's what we're going to be voting for, is actually who rules us and whether or not we're going to be up front, top table, or whether we're just going to be little servants of Brussels doing what Brussels decides is what's going to happen on the global agenda.
You're quite right. To go back to Heath's question, God knows that we should quote Mr. Heath on anything, but who governs Britain is what this referendum is really about. And it's being argued about in such a stupid, slipshod, ill-informed, chaotic way by all these political lightweights who I mean, why? It's not a general election. Why have we got the same politicians on every night?
Yes, telling us. Yeah. But simple question, who rules Britain? Well, if we vote to remain, the answer we will have given us is not us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's about.
Yeah. And that, unfortunately, is again part of the price we've paid for the fact that 40 years ago, we went into something without knowing what we were going into. We gave away our right to govern ourselves. We didn't realise it for years until suddenly it all started to close in on us, like that Edgar Allan Poe short story about the prison cell all closing.
The spikes coming
because
down
we
the
do
walls.
realise now that we don't govern ourselves.
Yeah.
And we would actually quite like to do it. Whether we're actually equipped to do it, because we've lost the habit of thinking for ourselves.
We'll relearn it.
We have to relearn it. Yeah. But we used to be a great nation. Well, and as I often say, North, You know, I say there's still an awful lot of very good people in this country. The trouble is that none of them are running it.
Yeah, thanks. We'll get there. Okay.